So how's everybody? How you doing, all right?
Progress as far as we can go now, we're going the
I
other way.
have a question about the sermon this morning.
Okay, start out big time. Yeah, okay, Richard.
Jairus, when his daughter was brought back to life,
Mhm.
and Jesus said to Jairus, don't tell anyone. Why did Jesus, or I don't know, maybe we don't know, but maybe Bible scholars ask the same question that I'm gonna ask you. Why did he want to keep it a secret?
Nobody's real sure about that, but there used to be, I don't know, in the 1970s, there was a whole bunch of guys who used to write about that, and they refer to that as the Messianic secret, because there were a whole bunch of times in the Gospel of Mark particularly, where Jesus does miracles, and then he says to people, don't tell anybody.
Yeah, I've always wondered
Okay,
that.
and the theory was that Jesus was saying, don't tell anybody that this happened. Don't tell anybody this happened because he didn't want pre-publicity, shall we say,
Mm.
okay? Because he didn't want them to get the wrong idea. So in other words, it would not be until after the resurrection and Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit was poured out on the disciples, that everybody would, that the full understanding of, this is why all this happened. That, okay, now we get it. And this is why this is what all went into Jesus. But he didn't want any pre-publicity to that. You know, I mean, he couldn't help it because people were seeing what was going on and doing it. You know, it's kind of, and let me put it in a, you know, I don't know whether you're watching the news this weekend or not, but consider all the speculation with regarding to LeBron James and whether he's going to play with the Cavaliers this next year or not.
He sold his house.
You know, I don't even want to know. I don't even want to know, you know. No matter what he does, there's going to be speculation as to what he's up to, okay, for this next year. And so, you know, Jesus is up to that. You know, that was the whole idea with the Messianic secret and this whole notion. But, you know, I'm doing this because we want signs that say he is the Son of God, so that when he is revealed as the Son of God by the pouring of the Holy Spirit on Pentecost, and particularly on his crucifixion, but on Pentecost, so that the disciples can go back and say, oh, aha, that's what we see the evidence
That's the
of.
proof.
That's
Part
the
of
proof there.
Yeah. Oh.
But the pre-signs of it, you know, so, you know, the speculation is rampant regarding what LeBron James is going to do. When he finally makes his decision, people are going to go back and say, we knew it because we saw that and that and that and that and that. Okay.
Okay.
But it's kind of similar with Jesus, you know. There are going to be speculations all over the place, and there were. You know, they wanted to make him king, they wanted him to overthrow the Roman government, they wanted to do all kinds of stuff. And, you know, the more publicity got out, the more speculation it was going to be. And, you know, people are just what they are. So that's why he kept saying, don't tell anybody. And it just kept getting out. And then there was a story about one of my professors at college said, he had a student, or it was just a story that was going around, that there was a religion class where the professor on the final exam said, what's the Messianic secret? And one of the students wrote, if I knew what it was, it wouldn't be a secret. F! You know? So, go ahead, Beth.
I was going to say, my note here just says, with Jesus' popularity with the people, coupled with the opposition of the religious leaders, there could have been a crisis before the ministry was completed. So you're saying people, but they're also saying the religious leader part. I mean, that's just another throw in.
Yeah, whether he wanted
Yeah.
the religious leaders not to figure out what he was up to, you know, I don't know.
That's just what it says.
And also so gossip gets blown all out of
Mm-hmm.
proportion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as soon as you hear, don't tell anybody, but.
Yeah.
And it's-
You know, the other part that enters into that also is that you also, you know, Jesus was also conscious of saying, you know, there's that old saying of consider the source as well, and people do that. So there were times when demons would come up and they would say, I know who you are, you're the Son of God. And he would tell them flat out, you just shut up, you know, because people, you know, you have to say, if demons are saying you're the Son of God, then you have to consider the source. Do you actually want demons
To be your reference.
to be your reference? That's right. That's right. Yeah, good way to say it. Yeah. But good question. Good question. So, how about you guys? You doing all right? Everybody doing okay this week? Hot?
Yeah.
Tired? Cranky? So, about ordinary, right?
Business as usual.
Mhm. So I went off last weekend to last weekend? Yeah, okay, to the Board of Directors meeting of our district. And so we had a reasonably decent Board of Directors meeting, and our Western Circuit Vice President, Pastor Luke Jacobs, said, well, if I excuse myself early because my wife is expecting our 4th child any day, is that all right? And we're like, nah.
It's the fourth one.
It's the 4th one.
What the heck?
Yeah, so we finished our meeting on Tuesday, and the baby was born on Thursday.
That was considerate of
So,
them.
yes.
Yep. So they're very happy, and we're very happy. And I have to tell you, we were at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Whiting, Indiana, which is, Dennis was like, where's it? It's north of Hammond,
Yeah.
okay? So it's like, you know, Hammond?
Oh, yeah.
Hammond is like a city that is, you know, filled with marshes and fuel tanks, you know, refinery tanks.
It's on Westview.
Yeah, and Whiting is on the lake. And St. Paul Lutheran Church is that church that last year, very nice family, Pastor Henry and his family with 4 kids. And that last year, that was the parsonage where they discovered lead in the house. And they had to move the family out of the house, do the whole house top to bottom with lead abatement and the whole deal. And so we were in there, they said, you know, they had us over for pizza on Tuesday or Monday night. And we were all like, pizza, Chicago-style pizza. That thick and whatnot. And the house is beautiful. It looks like it could be a house, you know, an HGTV house. It's beautiful. They really did a really nice job redoing the whole house. The house is beautiful. The kids are running around like healthy imps, like they should be. The family looks happy, and everybody's in good shape. And you know, what a difference a year makes. So, and they were very appreciative of all the help they got from everybody in the district and so forth. One of the things Pastor Henry said was, you know, when they put the word out, I mean, when the people in the district found out that they had this issue, he said he was just amazed at the response from all kinds of people and congregations in terms of helping for them and for the congregation and so forth. He said that, you know, he has heard and known of other districts that are just like, oh, they have that? Oh. You
Too
know.
bad for them,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but in this case, a lot of people helped, and some came and did some work, some gave money, and when they couldn't come and so forth and so. But they're in good shape, the house looks really nice, the kids are just tremendous, bouncing off the walls of the church and the house and everything.
As long as they're healthy.
Yeah, and they're healthy and everybody's good, so they said thank you to everybody, so thank you, because we did some with that help too, so. All right, let's go to the book of Daniel. We're gonna look at Daniel chapter 1 today. And we haven't had this out in a while, we did this before. Actually, we did Daniel about 5 years ago, we did 6 chapters in Daniel, or 5 or 6 chapters, we were doing it a different way. And when we did this about 5 or 6 years ago, was the first appearance of this, handwriting on the wall, prophetic consultation services. My wife is groaning over there, because she never liked it in the first place. Because she said, you have to make sure that everybody knows it's not for real. So this is my satiric thing. But why not, okay? Royal objectives and prophetic solutions. So this is the deal. So what we heard from Don McLean earlier, if you just open this up, is Psalm 137. Last week we heard about, as we did the introduction, we heard about the Babylonians wiping out the city of Jerusalem and taking over them and killing a lot of the people and then taking some of them captive and so forth. And Psalm 137 comes from that time period then later on. We talk often about the Psalms as if they were, there's 150 of them, and we talk about them as if they were all written by David. But they weren't all written by David, and in fact, if you look in the book of Psalms, it'll say Psalms of David, Psalms of Asaph, a song of Moses. Okay, so it'll tell you that some of them were not written by David. And this one, Psalm 137, comes from this time period, the time of the exile in Babylon, and it's pretty clear that that's what it comes from. This is one of those psalms that is a psalm of lament that I mentioned. Let me look real quick, just so that I don't misquote myself. Because I'm pretty sure this is one of those one of the psalms that does not get selected for the front of the hymnal. It wasn't in the front of the Lutheran hymnal, I'm pretty sure. And yes, it's not in the front of this one either, so it didn't make the cut. And here's why. Let's read this one together, Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the poplars we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs, our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. Remember, Lord, what the Edomites did on the day Jerusalem fell. Tear it down, they cried. Tear it down to its foundations. Daughter Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is the one who repays you according to what you have done to us. Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks. Thanks be to God, right? Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Yeah, that's what you want to see in a worship service. That's a psalm of lament. And a good, a good curse, too. I mean, a good example of a curse. Okay? So there are the people in Babylon, and when they remember Zion, they're just weeping and mourning, and they put the harps on the trees, and when they're tormentors. Sing it, come on, you guys, sing us a nice song about Zion. Come on, chin up, right? Sing a song about Zion. Get happy. How can we be happy when we're here in a foreign land and Jerusalem lies in ruins? It's just not going to happen. And if I forget Jerusalem, may my right hand shrivel up. That's the hand you would strum the harp with. And the hand that you do everything with. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. And the Edomites were their historic enemies. They were the sons of Esau, and their historic enemies. And the Edomites are watching Jerusalem get conquered by the Babylonians. Going, yeah, tear it down to its foundations. Yeah, get it all the way down there. And that's not so subtle curse against the Babylonians. Happy is the one who takes your babies and smashes them against the rocks. So I think, the Sunday school, the way we teach Daniel in Sunday school, doesn't take this into account, that the people of Israel are in this land, and this is how they're feeling. This is how they're feeling. This does not come out in, the Veggie Tales, Rack Shack and Betty. They're just kind of dancing around and singing and that kind of stuff. But they really despise being there, and it's hard to express that. It's hard for us to imagine that. So this will show up again and again. I mean, this kind of attitude, and there's numerous versions of Psalm 137 that have shown up over the years, and I'm not going to play them all today, but I'll play several of them when we get started. But by the rivers of Babylon. Okay, let's open this up and let's look at Daniel chapter 1. And if you need a bigger, I think the Bible's probably a little bit bigger sizes, but here we are. This is
I think this is bigger.
this is bigger than the Bible. You think? Okay.
Yeah.
So this is our official brochure for handwriting on the wall, prophetic consultation services. It also goes with the website that we have, handwriting on the wall, LLC. But Daniel chapter 1. Somebody read that first paragraph there.
In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God, to Babylonia, and put in the treasure house of his God.
Okay, so thanks. So he gets the stuff from the temple of God, the furnishings from the temple of the God of Israel, and puts them in the treasure house of the Babylonian God. Okay, that's a pretty symbolic thing, because now he's saying, your God is basically prisoner of my God. You people are my prisoners, your God is the prisoner of my God, and is the property of my God. All right? That's basically what he's up to. Your God is now the property of my God, just like you people are my property. You're my slaves, prisoners of war. Okay. Now, somebody read the next paragraph then, please. 3, 4, and 5.
Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, 4 young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service.
Okay, fine, thanks. That 4 is actually the verse number, sorry about
Oh.
that. Yeah, it's not just 4 young men, but several young men. Okay, so, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude, okay. So you're gonna train these, so we're gonna bring these guys in, train them for 3 years, and they'll enter the king's service. And basically what's gonna happen is you've got some intelligent, well-trained, well-behaved, upper-class Jewish guys that we're gonna train to work for the Babylonians and kind of be a buffer or a go-between between the Jewish people and the Babylonians. This is basically what they're gonna do. Okay. And they're from the royal families and from the nobility and so forth. They're some of the surviving sons of these people. Okay. The ones that weren't killed in the war and all that kind of jazz. Sometimes what they would do in the ancient world was they would not necessarily kill, they would just kind of slaughter people randomly. But in the ancient world, sometimes they would just not kill the royal sons and sometimes they'd kill them because they would say, these guys are gonna create a new rebellion and they wouldn't wanna go back, and so we're gonna kill them. Sometimes they wouldn't kill them so they could hold them as hostages. Say, we'll capture the princes and we'll keep them in the palace, and that way they'll be hostages. We'll treat them real nice and royally and so forth, honestly, but we'll hold them as hostages. But in this case, there's no one to hold them hostage to because there's nothing left in Jerusalem. There's nothing to ransom them with, so what's the point? Well, the point is, you got a whole bunch of Jews who are slaves now in Babylon, and somehow we got to manage them and control them. So how are we going to manage them and control them? Well, instead of managing and controlling them with Babylonians, let's manage them and control them with their own people. With people who are used to being in charge, that is to say, with the nobility. They're people who are used to being in charge, right? The upper class. So let's get young people who are used to being from that social status, and we'll put them in charge of the lower class Jews, but we'll bring them into the Babylonian court so that we can kind of win them over, teach them the Babylonian language in the courtroom and such. Okay, so that's how they'll keep the lower class Israel. So they're all going to be slaves, basically. Everybody, all the Jews are slaves, but they're bringing the noble class ones, the upper class ones, so that they can be in charge of the lower class ones. And that way, the Babylonians will have to worry less about an uprising. That's the theory anyway. But they're still all going to be slaves. So bring these guys in there and let's teach them how to be Babylonian government workers.
So they tried to stack the deck in their favor.
Yep, yep. Which, probably isn't such a bad idea because, if these Jewish guys learn the Babylonian ways, they could probably schmooze the Babylonians too.
Well, and I'm sure that since they were used to being the upper class, if you would put them in with the commoners, they would probably rise up.
Yeah, they wouldn't get along
The
too well with
chances
it
are-
either, yeah. So, they're in a,
So they're stuck any which way you look at it.
they're stuck any which way you look at it, right, so it's probably best to put them in some kind of use, so. Here's King Nebuchadnezzar, the second of the Babylonians. That there were actually two of them is interesting. There were two Babylonian empires, by the way, separated by several hundred years, and this is the second. So here's Nebuchadnezzar, who just had this marvelous beard. I'm kind of envious of that beard,
Kind of filmy,
but not enough to let mine grow long enough that I would put little braids and cornrows and stuff on it.
cornrows.
6 and 7 I'll read just for the sake of convenience. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official, Ashpenaz, gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. Okay? So, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are the names we know them by. Those are actually Babylonian names. We don't remember Daniel as Belteshazzar, but that's his Babylonian name also. We remember Daniel. But then we remember the Babylonian names. Because Babylonian names were easier for the Babylonians to pronounce and remember. Because that's what masters always do for slaves, right? Think of Roots. Okay, remember watching Roots? When people own slaves, they give them new names. I don't care what your African name was, we're gonna call you Billy. You know, or whatever it is. Okay, that's what they do. First time you run across that is, that I ran across that was in the movie North by Northwest with Spencer Tracy. He's Rogers Rangers and he's leading a bunch of guys in the Northwest. And there's a Native American Indian boy in those days. And he looks at him and he says, I'm calling you Billy. And I don't know what his name is, but he said, I'm calling you Billy. You know, because that's what white people do with inferior. But that's what Babylonians did. You know, we're not calling you Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. We're calling you Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel, we're calling you Belteshazzar.
It's funny, but Daniel is still Daniel, but the other three are known as.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So what are you gonna do? But this is the sign of how we know that they're masters and you're slaves, because we give you new names, whether you like it or not. Okay, good. So somebody then read the next paragraph, please.
But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission to not defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. You should see you looking worse than other young men your age. The king would have my head because of you.
Yeah, okay. So, why should, you know, I don't want to do that. Okay. The king has told us, this is what you guys are supposed to eat. And I'm afraid that the king is going to be upset if you don't eat this. Okay, so somebody then read the next paragraph, please.
Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah,
Mm-hmm. Good job.
please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days.
Okay. So, they come to Daniel and the boys, and they say, here you go, you're among us, so here's what you're gonna eat. And Daniel looks at it and he goes, no, we don't think we wanna do that. So I'm not gonna eat that. So then he enters into this negotiation with the Ashpenaz, okay? And Ashpenaz said, please, you gotta eat it, because the king said you have to eat it. So they enter this negotiation. How about if you just let us eat vegetables and water for 10 days? And then compare us with the others and see if there's any difference, if you notice any difference in health. So, 10 days they eat this diet. Okay. And what happens at the end of 10 days? Read 15 and 16, please.
At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead.
Okay, so it worked, right? They're healthier, they're better nourished, and so they get to eat. They get to live in the king's service and eat nothing but vegetables. They get to live a vegetarian life, in other words. Okay. That's not the point, but we'll get to that.
Veganism begins.
Veganism. Well, yeah, and the doctors are happy, So then you had this whole thing a year or so back, a couple years ago, about the so-called Daniel diet, okay? And you have all this kind of beany, grainy stuff, eat vegetables and grain, and people were writing things about it and blog. Well, let's do the Daniel diet, okay? And it'll be a lot healthier and all that other stuff. And see, veganism is part of the Bible. It's like, and they missed the point of why they did this in Daniel. The point of why they did this in Daniel was not so they could be vegan. They missed the point in this whole thing. Because I think the idea here was that when they looked at they were Jews, and if it wasn't vegetables, they couldn't be sure it was kosher. And they couldn't be sure it was prepared kosher. And there weren't any rabbis to make sure it was prepared kosher, because they were in captivity, and there weren't any priests to do the sacrifices right. So the best they could do was be to say, let's have vegetables and water, because vegetables and water, none of that is part of the whole kosher thing. Meat and cheese and milk and stuff like that, that's all the kosher stuff. Okay, so the best thing to do if you want to live a kosher life in a foreign land where you're a slave and there aren't any priests or rabbis or sacrifices and all that other stuff, is just not to eat anything that falls under the kosher laws. So what's left? Vegetables. Okay? And that's what they did. So that's the deal. So they never went to the meat counter at Mac's, you know, or Bueller's. Because that's what
That's
you do.
kosher hot dogs.
No bacon.
No bacon, no, you know,
Kosher bacon.
kosher bacon. No, you don't have that, but, although I have known a couple of Jewish guys in my life who have occasionally said, you know, I really enjoy keeping kosher, but occasionally I'd kill for a bacon double cheeseburger, you know? Because kosher is all about the meat and the milk and the cheese. And if you can't be sure that it's been prepared right, because there aren't any people to do it right, like the priests and the rabbis, then you just don't eat it at all. And that's what Daniel's choice was. Which means what? Vegan.
And organic.
And organic.
Mhm.
Okay? And it, you know, and as it turned out, after 10 days, they looked a lot healthier than those guys who were eating all that other stuff. Yes. Oh, so then people in the, you know, in the 2000s, oh, this is the Daniel diet. Veganism is biblical. It's like, that's not the point. You know? And then all the Hasidic Jews in Brooklyn are like, see if he told you. You've been telling you this for thousands of years, but you've not listened.
Yeah, but you know, thinking about it, maybe that was God's way of showing the Babylonians that if you, God's background, He showed His miracle. That, yeah, even if they're drinking or eating one piece of, a little portion of a vegetable, they're still gonna be healthier than you guys that are eating.
Right. And that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And that's the other part of it too, is that, you know, it's a testimony to the Babylonians, you're right. You know, that God is with these guys because they are healthier, you know, than the Babylonian, or than the ones on the Babylonian food. And so, I mean, we want to be clear that it's not only the Jewish kids, or the Jewish young men that are, I mean, there's probably other nations that the Babylonians have captured whose kids are in this program too. Okay, it's probably not only Jews, but it's, you know, from other nations, Egyptians or whatever, that are in this grooming program. So they look healthier than even the Babylonian boys. So this is God's way of saying, see what's going on. So you're right about that. Okay, let's go on a little bit, and let's see what God does. Verse 17.
To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds.
Okay, very good. And we will get into some dreams and visions that Daniel understands. In fact, next week we'll talk about Daniel understanding the king's dreams. Daniel interprets a couple dreams of Nebuchadnezzar, but Daniel doesn't actually have any visions of his own until many years later. Okay, he's in the king's service, in the service of the kings, for almost 70 years. Okay, as it turns out. So he interprets a couple of kings for Nebuchadnezzar, but he doesn't have any visions of his own until quite far along the way, okay, in the administration. So let's, verse 18, and somebody then read the rest of these, please.
At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in the whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus.
Okay, thank you. Now, King Cyrus is the one who's gonna let the Jews go back to Jerusalem after 70 years in Babylon, okay? So Daniel is gonna be 80 plus, maybe close to 90 years old when this is gonna happen, when they go back. Okay, so he's gonna remain in the service of the king for almost 70 years. Daniel is. Okay.
That makes for a pretty old king too.
No, there were several kings. You had Nebuchadnezzar, then you had Belshazzar, who was his son, and then you had Darius, who was the king of the Persian, or the Medes, and then you had Cyrus, who was the king of the Persians. So you had several changes of administration there. But Daniel's 70 years. I mean, Daniel's in that position for close to 70 years. So, like I said, he might be 80, close, 80 or more years old before he's done. All right, so Daniel is in there with these guys. This is, all the other Jews are slaves. I mean, these guys are upper crust, they're in the king's palace, all the other guys are slaves. I mean, they're working the fields, they're doing all this other stuff, making shoes and grinding the grain to make the bread and all that other stuff. And that's something we can't forget. I mean, the Daniel stories and the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stories, they're about upper class people. They're not about field slaves. And yet all the Jews are slaves. They all are. And if we focus on the Daniel diet, I think we miss the point too, because none of this is really about the diet. Okay, but there are some other things that we can think about. Like, for instance, here's something that we could consider. Okay, here's a picture, for instance, of Jesus with a crown. Okay, and this comes from a blog post that is an example of a Christian nation. Okay, and you don't have that picture, do you? Yeah, you have the picture, but you don't have the post. This comes from a post that's called An Example of a Christian Nation. And obviously Babylon was not a Christian nation, but apparently this blog post says, Poland has officially crowned Jesus Christ as its king. So, there you have it. Jesus is the king of Poland. It also remains resolutely pro-life. Christian morality reigns. Let's see if we can bump this up several notches. And the Catholic Church enjoys a special status and official influence. Poland may thus be the world's only explicitly Christian nation. There you go. What do you think of that?
What's the next paragraph?
I was gonna say, when was it?
Yeah.
You guys see the button
Yeah.
there?
Well, see the rest of the story. It just talks about it's an unabashedly Catholic society, it's a democratic Catholicism, it's resisted postmodernism, and it's just about a modern state firmly grounded in the principles of liberal democracy, overthrowing the Soviets, but liberalism need not be the end of history. It's all the good stuff that you hope to see in a Christian country, okay, is basically what it's saying. Okay. All the good stuff you'd hope to see in a country that says we're a good Christian country. Maybe the author of the blog, who is a Lutheran, says, is that really what we want to see? Because Martin Luther would say, You know, there ought to be a kingdom of the right hand, which is where God rules, and a kingdom of the, you know, in his church, and a kingdom of the left hand, and maybe the two ought not to be so intimate like that. You know, maybe there ought to be something that looks a little bit more like the separation of church and state. And maybe Poland is a little bit not that way. Maybe the Vatican ought to be an explicitly Christian country, and that ought to be the only place. Okay. But I don't know. Babylon certainly was not a place where believers could flourish, because they took all the things from the temple and said, you know, your God is now the property of our God. And you people are now our slaves. So I don't know, what do you think? Poland now has Jesus as its king. So does that make Poland a more Christian country than ours?
No.
That's good, they're
Oh,
Christian.
No, that was fast.
Yeah.
That was fast. You said no.
So if you're not Catholic, you need not venture into the country.
Oh, that's an interesting way to say it. If you're not Catholic, you need not venture in there. Okay, no. Yeah, I don't know what that means, because it doesn't really say anything about what happens to the non-Catholics, especially the non-Catholic Christians. Yeah.
There
It's
you
not a
go,
good
Catholics
place
taking
to-
over again.
It's not a good place to start a Baptist church.
It might not be a good place to start a Baptist church. I don't know. I don't know. I do not know. It doesn't talk really about that. It talks about, you know, what Luther had to say about kingdom of the left hand, kingdom of the right hand. Here's a different story. We'll get to that one in a minute. Here's a different story. This is another story about the government. This one you didn't hear about this week, but it happened this week. Did you hear this one? Larry probably read this one.
Yep.
Pro-life clinics, Supreme Court says pro-life clinics cannot be forced to promote abortion. This was a ruling, this was a big hearing this week in terms of our government. California, there was a 2015 law in California that forced pregnancy centers to provide written information advertising how to obtain abortions in the state at taxpayer expense. Okay, so if you went to any pregnancy center in the state of California, any kind of pregnancy center, no matter who was funding it, they had to, there was a law that said that pregnancy center had to give you information as to where you could get an abortion at taxpayer expense. Even if it was a faith-based pregnancy center. Okay, that was what the California law said. Because they said taxpayers are funding abortions, so you have to provide that information. And so the state Supreme Court, or the United States Supreme Court said that law is a violation of the First Amendment. Okay, faith-based pregnancy centers that are providing counseling for women with pregnancy do not have to tell them, here's where you can go to get an abortion.
And that was just this week.
That was just this week, that was June
Yeah.
27th.
It was the same day everything went up, the day before he retired.
Yeah, it's the day before Clarence Thomas retired.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, what do you think about a government that does that.
It's in the right direction.
Why do you think it's in the right direction?
Well, at least it gives the people their choice. You know, if I don't wanna hear about it, don't tell me. You know, I mean, they should basically say, okay, it's there, if you want it, if I come in there and ask about it, then fine, tell me. But if I don't ask, don't stand there and say, oh, we have to give you this, you know.
And there's plenty of other places. If you're going into a pro-life facility, you don't wanna hear
Yeah.
because you've already decided you are pro-life. If you wanna go into the gutter, go into the gutter, but this is what you believe in, you shouldn't have anything else shoved down your throat.
Well, one would think, and yet the state of California seemed to think that, in passing that law, that, pro-life clinics ought to follow the law of the state and say, you know, your taxpayer money is supporting this clinic, so you have to advertise it. And the Supreme Court disagreed.
Pretty good.
Well, yeah, yeah, I agree, but let's try this one. Baptism violates the baby's rights and more from Once Catholic Ireland. Did you see this one? This one. There's another one came the same day. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but within the last month, there was a vote in Ireland that really blew up the pro-life internet. Ireland had this article in its constitution. It wasn't even a law. It was in the Constitution of Ireland that was an article that said that that proclaimed rights for the unborn. That said unborn people have basic human rights, and it was in the Constitution of the nation of Ireland. And they had a popular vote this past month that by a margin of 2-1 eliminated that provision from their constitution. So it wasn't just a law, but it was a constitutional thing. Over 60% of the people of Ireland said, let's take that out of the Constitution completely. So the unborn no longer have a guarantee of human rights in the Constitution of the nation of Ireland. And that was pushed by their government and so forth. And so now, the former president of Ireland, well, it's the former president, but Mary McAleese, who is one of the, still she's a powerful person. The former president, Mary McAleese, is claiming that baptism oppresses babies because it denies them the right to choose their religion for themselves. And one of the big squawks about Ireland is that the church is really not standing up to the politicians the way they want to. The church is just kind of going, oh, what are we supposed to do? And some of the people are saying, you bishops ought to take your bishop's crutch or your sticks and whack them over the head with these things. You know? Do what you ought to do as bishops, you know, what they're not doing.
They just passed abortion over there, didn't they?
Well, yeah, the implication is that there is
Well, no, I thought it passed though, didn't it?
Is it?
That's the
Yeah.
same part as
Oh,
this.
is
Yeah.
it? Okay.
Yeah, if they remove the constitutional provision that unborn have human rights, then they can they can go right to passing abortion laws.
Ireland is now pro-choice.
Yeah, yeah. So they can pass whatever abortion laws they want to now because they've removed the constitutional provision. And they can do whatever they want in terms of abortions.
So what happened to train up a child?
Well, you know, this is what this person says. You and I know we live now in times where we have the right to freedom of conscience, freedom of belief, freedom of opinion, freedom of religion, and freedom to change religion. The Catholic Church yet has to fully embrace that thinking. My human right to inform my own conscience, my human right to express my conscience, even if it is the case that contradicts the magisterium or teaching authority of the Church, that right to conscience is supreme. Even if that says, you know, the idea that you just expressed, Heidi, train up a child, is, to my way of thinking, it's a fundamental teaching of the Christian Church that that is a responsibility of parents. Okay, so if you're going to say, you know, a baby gets the right to choose what religion they belong to, then that flies in the face of saying a fundamental teaching of the Christian Church is that parents have that responsibility of their children to teach that religion to their children. So, no, if you're gonna say the baby has the right to choose their religion, then that means that you're saying we're gonna take that right away from parents, which is a fundamental responsibility of Christianity. And that's interfering in the fundamental part of Christianity.
It's interfering with family.
Right.
Just means more that you're not liable for your kid.
Well, it means more than you're, but it's, I mean, I think it's more than, that you're not, than liability for your kid, and it's more than you're liable for your family. It's interference in the practice of, it, you know, they're talking about freedom of, she's talking about freedom of belief, freedom of religion, but then they turn around and say, if we're taking away from the parents the right to train up a child the way, which is fundamental part of Christianity, then they are interfering in the practice of your religion, and your religion has not become free then. You're not free to practice of your religion if you're not free to train up your child in the way that they should go. If the government comes in and says you can't do that, then that's not freedom of religion. So, you know, they're saying freedom of religion for your baby means that we're restricting your practice of religion. So,
I say, as long as I'm responsible for my child to the age of adulthood, no one should be telling me what I can teach them.
well,
And if I can teach them
the other-
Christianity.
There's another side of that one.
Well, that's
Yeah.
true.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Go to your school. It used to be that's the way it was, that's it.
Yeah.
There's no reason after what's about it. Now today it's like, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that.
you know,
Yeah.